You mentioned the other night, speaking of the alien, Terence's attempts to get shrooms to tell him something he didn't know as proof of an intelligence, not from his own mind. Do you feel as though he proved that?
No.
No?
No. I mean, I don't think so, because...
But those things that he said the mushroom told him.
Well, the things that he said the mushroom told him,
Sure.
but then you've got to be able to kind of verify that independently, and it's very hard to do that, And then he admitted that the mushroom is it's a trickster. It can't be trusted. You have to keep your analytical faculties intact, or you risk essentially sinking into delusion. You have to try and keep a certain perspective. I mean, I had I think I talked about it in the book, but I had a mushroom experience once where I was thinking about a particular cosmological model, traceable to a Swedish physicist named Hans Alfvén, and the idea was that the universe is made up of equal parts matter and antimatter, and that the antimatter universe existed co-contiguous with the matter universe, but in the quantum interstices of the matter universe, whatever I mean by that, and I'm not even sure what I mean by it, but in my trip, the perception was that if these things were ever to come together at every point in space-time, they would annihilate each other and leave only photons, right? So this is the scenario, and in my trip, my perception was, well, the fact that you realize this means that it's going to happen. And it's going to happen right now. And so I got into this place where I thought, well, you've just collapsed the space-time continuum. You will be known as the one that fucked it completely up. And it took Terry, a good hour or two to talk me down from this. So, yeah, I don't think so. Possibly.
So you came up with that idea. You're like, I could have came up with that idea. I did it.
Yeah.
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 And some of those fantastic quotes in the Terence, really insightful stuff that, nature loves courage. These things that he accredits to the voice of the mushroom. This is really,
him.
You think it's really him?
No, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, this is one of the big unanswered questions when you take mushrooms or any of these psychedelics that seem to initiate this I-thou sense, this I-thou dialogue. Is the thou in that conversation, is that part of your mind that is split off and is reflecting itself back to you as something not yourself? Is that what it is? Or is it really another entity that you've contacted through some transdimensional connection of some type, and it's downloading, what it knows to you? And it's very hard to answer that question. And, a reductionist neuroscientist would say, no, it all comes from the brain. This is all generated by your brain, and it's an epiphenomenon of that. Shamans will give you the exact opposite. They're like, whoa, we experience this as real, and as far as we're concerned, it's real. And it may as well be real because the actions that you take based on that are real and have an impact on the world. So, again, I mean, I don't know if neuroscience will ever be able to answer this question. I think it's a big challenge. Maybe if we're ever going to understand consciousness, that's an important question we have to answer.
And you don't think it's sufficient for the DMT flash to be that evidence that, oh, this is definitely not coming from my...
Well, how is it though? I mean, the DMT flash is predicated on pharmacology. It's predicated on deliberately tweaking your brain in some way, to make it do what it does. So is it purely, is the DMT the source of this, or just the catalyst to opening up these access to these portals?
Well, don't you say that? You say like the brain is the sort of the antenna that's receiving the channel.
I think that's a closer model than the idea that the brain is generating all this.
That makes sense to me.
It does make sense. It makes more sense to me too, But then you can, again, that's the question. Graham Hancock, other people have talked about this. Is the brain the detector of the signal? You can completely destroy the brain, you can destroy the television set, and the signal is still there. And I think it's a bit of both, actually. I think the brain is a detector of some kind of aspect of consciousness that is built into the structure of reality. But it's also a processor of it, an interpreter of it, a filter in some ways. One of the ways I've interpreted DMT experience, and I think there's something to it, is that DMT, what we talked about it the other night, and this idea that we construct a model of reality. That's what our brains do. We construct a hallucination, essentially, and we inhabit that hallucination, and we call it, this is reality. But it's really a model of reality. We do not directly interface with reality at all. We interface with our model. And so, I think that a lot of what the brain does is you've got this sensory neural interface, all these signals coming in a raw form, which the brain takes, massages, and sort of extrudes, if you will, into the movie that we live in, the movie that we experience as being. And DMT can sometimes temporarily just let you look behind that process, let you back up in the stream a little bit and look at the raw data of what is the stuff before it's processed that we process and exude. It lets you look at this stuff, and it's made up of all kinds of things: sensory impressions, memories, fragments of songs that you heard 20 years ago, conversation with, your girlfriend. All this stuff is just kind of floating out there in this, and it's like you're putting it into a blender, you're turning on the blender, and what comes out is a nice smoothie. Makes a lot more sense than all the raw vegetables that you jammed into the blender. And that we comprehend, that we can navigate it.
The fact that we sort of have these receptors that receive the chemicals to go to these places and to see these things, what does that mean from an evolutionary standpoint? What do you think that means? It's so interesting.
Well, I think, it is. It's interesting. I think it is a reflection of our coevolution, with these plants, with these chemicals. We're all, at some basic level, all life kind of has the same biochemistry. And these molecules that we discover in plants that seem to have this, in a way, message for us, or we can take them and opens up realms of consciousness that were unsuspected. Whether, again, you have to be careful of postulating that somebody's writing all this or controlling all this. I think it's just, these molecules that plants produce, they were originally adapted to signal exchange in the environment, and that's still what they're doing.
The plants themselves exchanging signals, of
Yeah,
course, and
yeah.
we were somehow had a telephone as well. We still have it. We just don't pick up the bat phone as often as we used to.
Exactly. We were part of it. Ecologies are linked together by matrices of chemical signals, in a sense. This is why plants make such a vast array of so-called secondary compounds, because plants substitute biosynthesis for behavior, right? They respond to their environment through chemistry because they have photosynthesis going for them. So they can't run away. They can't use animal adaptations to threats in the environment like we can do the fight or flight reaction. Yeah. We can run away. Plants don't do that. They have to deal with it on a more chemical level. So that's what these compounds are. They're messenger molecules. And a lot of the message that they send out to other plants, things in the environment, fungi, bacteria, things that might want to consume those things, are messages of repellence, stay away, stay away. They're protective. But then along come the curious primate with the hypertrophied brain, and we get those signals, and we respond differently to it in a lot of ways. We say, maybe something like nicotine, for example, is definitely a poisonous, toxic chemical, but we rather enjoy it.
Yeah.
So we go back to it and deliberately sort of hijack this plant's protective, carefully evolved protective mechanism and turn it to our own purposes. And because we like to tweak our receptors, right? That's
an
inbuilt, because it's pleasurable, it's fun,
yeah,
it's stimulating.
We love hookah.
We love hookah. Yeah, we love altered states.
Sure.
I mean, we're conscious all the time, and we're always, we're novelty seekers. So one way to seek novelty is to push the envelope of what's possible in the realm of conscious experience, and these molecules facilitate that. So ultimately, the plants that produce these things do benefit, because then we tend to form symbioses with the plant. Maybe it was originally a repellent chemical, something that was out there to dissuade them, but we come along and we reverse that equation, and we adopt the plant to our purposes. That's great for the plant because it protects it. Domestication of a plant protects it from the vicissitudes of competing in the wild.
So the plant wants to be desired.
It wants to
by
be desired. Us. Yes. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And as Michael Pollan and other people have pointed out, we form these symbioses with plant. Who is really, we domesticate corn, for example, but corn is the quintessential capitalistic plant. It adapts itself very well to global systems of industrial agriculture that run on petroleum. So who is domesticating who here?
That's a good question. This reminded me of a question that someone asked in the forum. Asked if you were familiar with Tony Wright's theory in the book Left in the Dark. And,
yes.
Which clearly you are. And something about asking do you believe that we are now, in a sense, brain damaged since becoming disconnected with nature? Would you call it that?
I would call it that. Yeah. I think he's got some very good points. Are you familiar with his work?
I'm not.
Yeah. Well, his premise is that, at a certain point, our diet changed. At a certain point, we lost this connection between the right brain and the left brain. That those two hemispheres were much more integrated, and we had a more holistic kind of consciousness. And
sure, I can totally
dietary
believe it.
changes kind of disrupted that connection. And that he sees that as a devolution of the brain, not an evolution. And it's just continued as first agricultural and then inventions such as cooking, for example, which completely changes the nutritional biochemical profile of the foods that we eat, has over time resulted in this essentially neurological devolution of our species.
So are there certain foods that are more right-brained foods that we're not inculcating in our diet? What would be some examples of that?
Well, he talks about, right brain foods, things like fruits,
Sure.
Fruitarian type diet with, complex amino acids, much more, tryptophan, for example, much more of that kind of thing. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors, a kind of a biochemical diet that really, in some ways, simulates pineal physiology, in some ways potentiates these functions that we traditionally associate with the pineal gland. And some of the nutrients that we get from eating meat, for example, have the opposite effect. They suppress these pineal functions.
We're talking about fluoride in the water, in our drinking water, and what that does to the brain. Why is it in there? And
why is the fluoride in the drinking water?
Yeah. Do you think the powers that be know that it's can make you a zombie,
No, I'm not sure it does make you a zombie. I'm kind of skeptical about that because this discussion about the calcification of the pineal gland.
Sure. Yeah, I've heard that.
The pineal gland calcifies naturally when you get older. That doesn't mean it loses its function, right? I mean, it does become calcified, but that doesn't necessarily destroy its function. I'm not sure I buy this. This kind of gets close to conspiracy. I'm just not sure I buy it.
It does sound a little bit like that to me. It's strange that it would be in the water in the first place, though. I don't.
Well, what, that they would add it to the water?
Yeah.
Well, there's.
Is it cleaning agent? I mean.
No, it protects against cavities. That's the idea. It makes your tooth enamel harder. That's supposedly the rationale. But the powers that be, I mean, there's all this talk about the powers that be. The problem is it presupposes that the powers that be somehow know stuff that ordinary people don't. I think the powers that be are as clueless as everybody else. If they weren't, we'd be in better shape than we are. I mean, if they are controlling all this, if they have all this knowledge, it's either deliberate attempt. Alexandre might say that that's what's going on, but it's a deliberate attempt to harm world populations, or it's just incompetence, ineptness. I don't think we can really say, I think that the public health decisions were made about fluoride some time ago. Maybe it needs to be re-examined, but I don't think it was done as a global conspiracy to make people stupid. That may have been the effect, but I don't think it started out that way.
A lot of people jumping on that as and it doesn't seem that way to me. I used to like how Terence used to say something like, when you get up to the top, you see that there's nobody manning the controls.
There's nobody manning the controls. That's the frightening part.
Sure.
In some ways. That really it's not that there is a conspiracy theory and that somewhere somebody knows what's going on. The truth is nobody knows what's going on.
I don't see how you could. It's so crazy.
Mm-hmm.
How could you? It's just... There's not a mind out there that can handle this.
Well, no. It's hard to say. It's hard to say, but I think we have to be careful of assuming that everything you see is some conspiracy. I mean, their law. That's what. That's when it happens in a person. It's called paranoid schizophrenia.
Right. Yeah.
This is why it's kind of sad to see Jan, sort of being sucked in by this. I mean, it's like, he is unable to step back from this. He's got himself so far into it and so convinced that he can't step back and say, well, maybe there's a different way to look at this.
It seems like he didn't start out this way either. You interviewed with him.
I interviewed with him years ago.
Yeah, and it seemed okay.
It seemed okay. Yeah, he's gotten into this gradually. I know a number of people who have worked closely with him who have sort of, they've moved away because they're not, they are just puzzled by the change that's taken place in him. And he seems to be a person that needs to see conspiracies.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with him at all until he sort of made a little visit to the forum and started putting his links up. And
oh yeah.
And I didn't know who he was, but everybody in the forum was very familiar with him, and they immediately
jumped on it.
Oh yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And then so I did a little bit of research. Who's this guy? What's he saying? That everybody. And wow, that's surprising to me. Yeah. Your interview with Joe Rogan has been extremely popular on the web. What was that whole experience like?
It was a great experience. We just, he's a wonderful interviewer, and we were on a roll, and we raved for 3 hours.
It's so good.
Yeah,
it really is. I think it's the best 2.5 hours of Dennis Mckenna on the web. It's wonderful.
That's so.
It's great. I just finished watching it for the second time. This is just wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. I enjoyed it very much. I mean, it seems to work best when, well, a good interviewer really helps. And he's an excellent interviewer. People like the podcast I did a couple weeks before that on Coast to Coast with was it George Kaplan, I believe. Got a lot of good feedback on that on their website. They were saying this is the best ever.
Yeah, great.
Glad you like it.
Good. There was, I guess we should start wrapping this up. I feel bad I've kept you over an hour. This was kind of a personal question that came out of the forum. In the book, you mentioned the unnecessary medical accident inflicted upon your father. You regret for not filing a malpractice suit. This happens quite a bit. The medical establishment seems to have their head up their ass, and the decisions that they make are often not what's best for the patient. And what can be done to bring the scientific world out of the dark ages and into the new paradigm, in your opinion? Is that something? It's quite a question.
Gosh, you want me to answer that question? I mean, I think, I think that everything about medicine needs to change. I think the medical system is quite dysfunctional. I mean, you don't need to listen to me. It costs too much money. There's too much reliance on technology as the answer to all the problems. Well, I mean, what we've one of the criticisms laid at healthcare store at this time is that it's based on, so much of it is based on fee for service, right, instead of outcomes, and I think that needs to change. In other words, physician feels that, and partly it's concern about malpractice. but feels that the more tests you can run, the more screens you can do, the more things you can do that you can actually bill for, is somehow a measure of the quality of care. And what's lost in that is the physician-patient relationship. Physicians should be more than just able to interpret a readout from a blood panel or an X-ray or, look at an MRI scan. Mm-hmm. They need all those skills.
Sure.
They need also compassion and sort of ability to relate to patients as people. The people are not machines to be fixed.
It's an industrial model.
It is. It's exactly an industrial model, and it arose out of. I have said many times in my lectures, it arose out of certain developments that took place at the beginning of the 19th century, notably Sertiner's isolation of morphine from opium. He was a Swiss pharmacist who was the first person to actually isolate morphine, the first alkaloid ever purified, right, in a crystalline form. And he tested it on himself and his friends, and it had all of the properties of opium as far as he was concerned. It was an analgesic, it was a narcotic, it was euphoric, and that was the beginning of a change in perception. That was essentially, something. Before we used to, the model for medicinal plants was that, they're spirits. They have an energetics or an intelligence or something that gives them these healing properties, and that switched the perception. Oh, they're not spirits at all. These are simply chemicals in the plants. And so, in a sense, this, and in the 19th century, that was the beginning of a whole series of isolation of alkaloids. First morphine, and then nicotine, and then cocaine, and all these sort of heroic drugs of the 19th century that became part of the pharmacopoeia of the 20th century were all alkaloids. And that was because the more or less crude chemical technology of the time enabled those compounds to be easily isolated in a pure form. But conceptually, what that resulted in was an exorcism of the spirit from nature, right? And changed the idea that, we are just mechanical systems. We're like a car. We're like complex machines. If you apply the right molecular monkey wrench, you can fix the machine. So medicine came to rely on pharmacotherapy, on pharmacology. Many of the other more holistic approaches were dismissed or suppressed or, no longer accepted in medicine. Now we're beginning to, and the idea of, the split between the mind and the body, that was also a part of it. Now we're sort of coming full circle, and that's why you're seeing the emergence of integrative medicine, which acknowledges a connection between the mind and the body, and that the mind, your state of consciousness, can influence healing and this sort of thing. We're rediscovering slowly and trying to reintroduce spirit or the spiritual into medicine. This is something that traditional healers have never forgotten, but medicine has forgotten it. And so it's a big challenge to rediscover it and reintegrate it. That's why, physicians, what medical schools are producing, and I think it's true generally of science in general, but medical schools are producing very clever technicians, but not healers. It's the healing aspect, which is part of the dynamic that happens between a doctor and the patient, and that often determines whether a patient can get well or not, because, and it's an intangible thing. You can't quantify it. No blood test is going to show this. Nothing, none of the quantitative measures that we apply to medicine are going to show this because it's inherently non-quantitative. It's it's a quality of the relationship, but it's definitely there. If a patient does not trust the doctor or doesn't sense a certain compassion, some sort of, again, I don't even know what the terms are, but some sort of connection that transcends all that, their chances of getting well are much less. I think that's part of the challenge of for medicine, is to become less mechanically oriented and more spiritually oriented in a certain sense. And that sounds like woo-woo, but I think it's really an essential part of the healing relationship. I mean, I spoke, I hang out with a lot of shamans, and I have over the years, but one of them once said to me something I've never forgotten, which he said, I can't cure anything, but I can heal everything.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was a profound statement, and including death, right? He could heal death in that patient was going to die, but he could bring that patient to a point where they were okay with that, and they could die a peaceful and a beautiful death.
Sure.
The peaceful and beautiful death is something that's very rare in medicine now. And it's because of our impulse, and it comes from, the best of intentions, but our impulse to keep the patient alive at any cost. And it really comes down to the patient to say, I don't want that. I don't want you to go beyond a certain step.
Right.
This is one of the interesting things that we found, the Hefter Research Institute and MAPS to a certain extent, but it's basically the Hefter has a number of protocols now using psilocybin to help terminal patients come to terms with dying. That the psilocybin experience can help them overcome their anxiety and really come to accept their death, but give them a certain perspective on that, that really is a kind of a healing perspective that, yeah, it's going to happen. It's part of it. So it helps them to accommodate to that. But we found that one of the biggest challenges in running these clinical trials is recruitment, because we have to recruit patients through cancer centers and this kind of thing. We have to get them. Oncologists do not want to refer patients to this kind of a study because it's an admission that their job is done and that they've failed. And they don't want to admit failure. It's not really that they failed, but they're going to lose the patient, and for them to refer them on to that kind of a protocol they have to admit to themselves that everything they've tried to do has not worked.
But do you have to go through that channel to get your subject? Do you have to go through the referral?
Well, you have to get you have to refer some way. We recruit through all kinds of channels, sure. But because these are FDA approved studies, you've got to get a referral through some kind of a clinical situation. I mean, interestingly, now we've found much better channels to get referrals through is not from the physicians, but through the nurses.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And the nurses are a lot closer to the patients, and a lot of the mandate of nursing is compassion and, make the patient feel good, make the patient feel as well as they can, even if you can't cure them. Oncologists and other types of doctors tend to be focused on the Holy Grail, which is a cure, where you can't always pull a cure out of the hat, and so they are reluctant to admit that.
And they probably will be for a while. It seems like the nurses is a good approach, and then hopefully in the future, as the public becomes aware of this option and can believe in it, the families will urge.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where I see psychedelics really making inroads. If something like psilocybin is gonna find a legitimate channel to be incorporated into medicine, this is one way to do it, to have that as an option for patients in hospice situations.
Sure.
I mean, it doesn't do much good for those of us who are dying,
right?
But you've got to start somewhere.
Do you think that one of the biggest effects of it in allowing someone to accept death is pulling, like we were talking about, pulling us out of the linear idea of life into a circular life and death, and realizing you're part of this circular life and death, and so this is not the end.
Right.
This is part of
life.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it has a big part to do, a big role to play in that. We are so focused as a culture and as individual on the future. We're always anticipating what's going to happen. And so then if you're in a terminal state, you become exclusively focused on this dreaded outcome somewhere in the future, your death. Many of the patients who have undergone this therapy have said in their reports, I stopped thinking about that. I decided that what's happening right now, I'm alive now. Things are pretty good. I'm focused on the moment and not the future. And that was really the main difference in their perception. And I think we'd all be healthier in some ways if we were able to focus on on the present. Because really, that's all there is. When you think about it, there is no past. That's a fiction. There's really no future. It hasn't happened yet. We're just here. It's the old cliche, be here now. I mean, it is a cliche, but there's insight in that idea.
You mentioned something the other night about trying to convince Terence when he was nearing the end to see a shaman and it not working, and you kind of somewhat regret for that, although your intention was good, but you think looking back it was a bad idea.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was probably a bad idea because it was more my agenda than his agenda. It was my response to, again, this anticipated end of this dreaded end of seeing my brother die, and all the things that we had experienced before, and sort of what we went through at La Chirera. I mean, at the time, when we learned that he had brain cancer, and that was pretty much a terminal condition, you grasp at straws, you wonder, you reach out for what might we possibly do. And so I had this idea that, either we can do this shamanic therapy and it will cure him, or if it doesn't cure him, we're essentially have to do what we set out to do at La Chirera and build him into the starship and send him off. But, without any effort, just sail off into hyperspace, do what we said we were going to do at La Chirera and failed to do. Mm-hmm. We have another shot at it. I don't know how much I really believed that. I mean, I probably didn't. I was trying to give him some hope. I don't think he bought into it at all. So, it's just a difficult thing. When somebody's dying, you want to help them. Mm-hmm. And if that comes to imposing your own idea of what it is to help them on them, then the impulse is to do that, because the impulse is to say, well, this is for your own good. This is what you need to do. But at some point the patient or the person has got to, you have to respect them enough to say, okay, no more. I don't want any more. I don't want to do it. You have to respect that. Everybody's got to come to terms with that. You see this all the time in terminal situations.
What about yourself? If you were
So in the end, it didn't work, But in the end, well, it did and it didn't work,
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, Terence made his own peace with death, and he went out the way he went out, and I can't second guess that. I can't second guess it.
For yourself, if you were, in a terminal situation, would you go full throttle with a shamanic effort?
To do what?
Heal?
To heal?
Yeah. Or to just accept it, to help you accept it more, maybe?
I don't know. I honestly can't answer that question because you're asking me to anticipate something again. And I anticipate that I will die. I mean, you'd be crazy not to.
Yeah.
But I don't have any idea how that's going to play out. So when the time comes, depending, then I may or may not do it. I mean, I feel that ayahuasca is a healing medicine. I might take ayahuasca. It's been my ally for many years. When Terence was dying, I wanted to give him ayahuasca, but I felt I couldn't give him ayahuasca because we weren't sure I was more concerned about the purging effect, and I was afraid that his brain being in a fragile state, it might put him at risk for a stroke or something. So I didn't want to give him a medicine that would cause a violent purge. So we relied on psilocybin, which is much gentler, but we never really crossed the threshold into some profound experiences. So again, I mean, I have no regrets. We did the best we could, but didn't save him, obviously. And I don't even know that was the agenda. It wasn't necessarily to save him, but I hope that he found peace before he died and went out in a peaceful way. But I can't say that anything we did really contributed much to that, So
I found that really interesting that when you were talking about that the other night to the live audience. It was like really it was a moment, I think, where everyone was like really feeling you.
Yeah.
Definitely. What can you say about botanical dimensions? There's been some questions in the forum that kind of curious, like, where's it at these days? Do you know anything about it? Can you give any information?
Well, it continues as a nonprofit, and they're trying to do some good things. I helped get a grant funded for them to work with a university in Peru to create a digital herbarium, a digital online version of their collections that would then be a global resource for botanical researchers in a variety of disciplines, But it's Kat's thing.
It's Kat's thing.
She works with it,
Yeah.
She doesn't like me anymore, so I guess I don't work with it anymore.
Oh. Because of the book thing?
Because of the book, yeah.
That's sad.
It is.
It's really...
But again, that's her choice,
right.
So I wish her well, and I hope she makes a success out of botanical dimensions.
And you got your Hefter thing going on, which is...
I'm just a board member of, there are a lot more important people on the board now. I mean, I guess my claim to fame there is I'm a founding board member.
Right.
I still have my affiliation with it. I go to all the meetings, and I have my input, but yeah, it's grown. We have some very good people on the board now, and we're kind of leading the charge. I mean, MAPS gets a lot of notice, though much more publicity. They also do good work.
Mm-hmm.
They've kind of staked out MDMA as their drug of choice, and a lot of their focus is on that.
Yeah. Which I find kind of curious, being that it just doesn't strike me as such a, in the psychedelic category. I really wouldn't.
It's not really a psychedelic. No. But the thing is, it does, it does have a lot of potential, I think, to treat especially PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And Rick Domlin's agenda, which he's always been pretty upfront about, was he wants this to be a prescription medicine. He wants so his agenda is political as much as scientific. He wants it to be available for use in therapy, and a lot of that focuses PTSD. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, our territory, we've kind of, not even deliberately necessarily, but we've kind of staked out psilocybin. Psilocybin is a perfect medicine for like these end-of-life situations. Yeah. It is a true psychedelic. There's no issues. MDMA has got some baggage because of the purported neurotoxicity problems and all that, which I don't really think that that's a problem given the way that it would be used, but it does have that baggage. Psilocybin doesn't have that. And its applications are different. And so, it goes forward. And really, I mean, our agenda is also political in the sense that, we would like to see it become available for use in therapy. In order to do that, you've got to change the schedule.
Yes.
You have to change the schedule with MDMA or any of these Schedule 1 substances that were just sort of, again, blindly placed in that schedule in a moment of great cultural hysteria.
Really awful, really.
And it took 40 years to unpack that and kind of reverse that.
And cannabis is still sitting there as well.
Cannabis is still
sitting there. It's so surprising to me. I mean, the overwhelming evidence that it has some medical value is an understatement, and yet still that schedule, it still lingers there.
Yeah.
But I think it's so...
But the people are out front of the establishment on that, too. They've just decided to make it legal for any kind of use for responsible adults. So I think the things that are going on in Washington and Colorado are very helpful. I mean, the medical marijuana thing, in a way, it goes away as a criterion. That was one way, but really, the stuff should just be legal.
Yeah. You mentioned this in the Joe Rogan interview, and I completely agree. Though they'll look at the states, they'll go back and look at the data, and it'll be right there.
It'll be right there. Yeah. But will they be able to accept it? That's the thing. I mean, it's there is a mindset that says my mind is made up.
Yeah.
Don't confuse me with facts.
Yeah. Right. Sure. My mind is made up. Don't confuse me with facts. Let's hope that doesn't.
Right. But if they look at it, I mean, the same is true of climate change and all that. Sure. This is the science deniers. The facts are there. You can look at it, but yet people are still able to. It does not fit in with my preconception. It doesn't fit with what I want to believe.
Yeah, but then you can always say, well, you hope in this instance we can say, hey, but what about the revenue?
Well, there is that.
And then you get them on that tip, hopefully.
Right. You get them
which is fine with me.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah. Whatever
it takes. I mean, it should be taxed. It should be regulated. It should be, but it should be available. That's the thing. And hopefully there will be. And considering the impact that alcohol has on our culture, the hope is that if you could buy pot in your local drugstore or whatever, a lot of people who now drink would either not drink or they drink a lot less.
Right.
And so statistically, I think you'd see, reduction in automobile accidents, reduction in domestic violence, reduction in all these alcohol-related illnesses, of which there are many. So the benefits of having legalized pot will show up in society on the economic, and societal parameters, but it'll take 10 years, before the statistics are there to support it. By the time this is realized, it'll be like, well, yeah, we told you so, of course, yeah.
I found it.
And then the people who opposed it most vehemently in the beginning will say, well, gee, we're sure glad we thought of that.
Right, of course they will.
Took credit for it.
Yes, of course. I go back
This
from...
is what we wanted to do all along.
I go back from New York, as an actor, from New York to Hollywood, back and forth, and so, and I always feel like I'm here, I'm with the alcohol people, and when I go out there, I'm not. Mm-hmm. It's different. It's very different, and I much prefer the other choice. I find it difficult to find activities in New York that don't involve alcohol. Whenever my friends is a get together, whatever, it could be as simple as bowling.
Yeah.
Go bowling here in New York City.
Yeah.
There's some people bowling. Everybody else is getting bombed and dancing, and no one even cares about the bowling. Even the most mundane activities have alcohol as the center piece of it, and which I just can't. It really bothers me. Being out in California, completely different and much more. The people are a little still weird out there.
Yeah.
But I find it to be a much better overall behavior and mindset, and I really like it a lot. And it would be nice to see some more of that,
Well, it takes a while, I mean, coming to New York, I think, my God, New York is like the ayahuasca culture, practically.
Everybody's talking about it.
Everybody's talking about
Sure,
it. A lot of sessions are going on. Mm-hmm. This has become some kind of epicenter for it, which is kind of interesting. It seems about as far from the Amazon jungle as it can get.
Yeah.
I guess it's its own kind of jungle. I don't know, but it's interesting.
So this might be the epicenter of the new urban shamanism that you were talking about.
Perhaps.
And do you think it's a mistake to sort of try and imitate the same ways that you take these substances or do this, or should we sort of embrace urban shamanism and try and create a whole ceremony or some sort of way to do it with this new mindset in this new setting?
I think we're borrowing from these traditions.
Sure.
I don't think it makes sense to try to imitate them slavishly, but there are certain things that you can integrate into it. They've been doing this for a long time, so they've learned a thing or two. You can't transplant Amazonian shamanism to New York City any more than you can go the other way. But I think what is growing is very hopeful. We're learning how to use this in our culture, and we're learning from the traditional sources. We're also integrating what we know about psychotherapy and those kinds of approaches. And I think you're going to see, psychiatry in 20 years is going to look a lot like shamanism, especially if these substances get integrated into practice. Psychiatrists will have to learn how to use them, and in these situations, most drugs, you give to the patients, not the doctors. But the doctors and the patients have to consume these things together. So the focus is not on the drug. The focus is on the psychodynamic environment that you create that the drug facilitates. And I think that psychiatry is going to learn from shamanism. Hopefully it's going to learn from shamanism, because as it exists now, it's a pretty pathetic endeavor. and it relies far too much on psychopharmacology, but the wrong kind of psychopharmacology. It relies on the chemical engineering of your personality and your state of mind, the antidepressants, the antipsychotics, the anxiolytics. All of these things are ways, pharmacological means of really sort of engineering states of consciousness so that if you have problems, they're Band-Aids. You don't get at the root of your problem. You just take a drug and you feel better. So they're sort of numbing, but they don't really cure you. But the whole biomedical, psychopharmaceutical, industrial complex is built on this model. There are trillions of dollars involved. There's tremendous profits involved to keep that model running. There's a great incentive to do that. Pharmaceutical industry is not interested in psychedelics. They're not interested in medicines that you take maybe 2 or 3 times in your life. Whereas there's no money to be made there.
Yeah, one could argue they're not interested in 100% healing or curing.
Well, indeed, they're not. They're not. I mean, the fact that they are not interested and are invested in perpetuating that model, it would make you suspect that they like it just fine. If there's not a oncoming population of fucked up people for them to treat, then they're going to go out of business. So again, this is conspiracy? I don't think so. I don't think it's exactly a conspiracy. I don't think it's that conscious. I just think it's, I don't know what the term is. It's.
No, I know what you mean, and it's the same instance with cannabis. There's an infrastructure set up for cannabis to remain illegal that they don't want that to change.
They don't want it to change.
Right. So I don't know what you call that, but it's the same.
It's the
same idea.
It's the law enforcement court.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing. It's this existing institution. All of these enforcement agencies, they employ a lot of people.
Right.
It's very convenient for the police to be able to seize people's property, and that keeps them going. So it's it's a self-sustaining.
You see all the police
bad
officers in
situation.
This city. I mean, there's so many cops in this city. I mean, if you take away the cannabis out of the equation, you don't need this.
You don't need it. Is that what they're doing primarily, you think?
Well, the stat that I read was something between 70 and 80% of the arrests in the city are marijuana related.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, see, we can't have that. I mean, all these cops are going to lose their job. They'll have to find honest work.
And there's so many new cops coming out I guess the police school the academy is right near where you spoke last, over in Gramercy. It's right over there. And I go down there a lot because my talent agency is there. I have to go down there, and I always see there's just so many new students. There's so many new officers in the academy. I get the impression that they're hiring thousands a year. It seems to me. I just see so many. And now what happens then if you take cannabis out of the situation? But I guess the governor of New York is trying to take some steps to kind of do what they've done up in Massachusetts, where I'm from, which is to make a small amount of it, not decriminalize.
Right, decriminalize it.
Yeah,
it only makes sense, I mean, there's plenty of real crime happening, and they should be focusing on that,
Yeah, I had an instance where...
I mean, most of the serious crimes that impact Wall Street do not happen do not happen on the street. They happen on Wall Street.
Right. Yeah.
There's not a lot of focus on those kinds of crimes, but those are what are destabilizing society and making it hard for the rest of us. And how many bankers have gone to jail?
It's crazy the way the effort that they go into regarding the cannabis situation in this city. In my experience, I had a first-person experience where I was pulled over riding my bicycle on the sidewalk, which is, you're not allowed to do that.
Right.
And they gave me a ticket for this, but I felt comfortable enough to ask to talk to the cop about the situation. I said, why, okay. So the other thing was, I was pulled over and the police were in an undercover taxi cab. So they jump out of this cab,
Right.
and which really surprised me. I didn't expect the cab to nab me on the bike. And then I said, so what's with the cab and the bike thing? Like, this just seems a little. I didn't say. I wanted to say, don't you have better things to do? I didn't say it like that. I said it a little more respectable. But they said, hey, there's a lot of kids dealing pot in this neighborhood where I was living, which is used to be Spanish Harlem, on bicycles. And I wanted to say, yeah, but the cab and this is this is a lot of resources going into this operation of yours. You have an undercover cab. Shouldn't you be doing bigger things with this vehicle?
Right.
Than grabbing kids on bicycles? And it was really, for me, real evidence that, these resources aren't going to where
They're
they need.
not being well used. Right?
No, I mean,
no, of course not.
Think of the neighborhood you could go into with that undercover cab, and think of the sort of, the places you could penetrate with that one vehicle. You really could be solving some real crimes with it, and it's just so strange to me. And luckily, I didn't have any weed on me at the time. Just the bike.
Did they search you?
No, they didn't.
They did.
No, they didn't. They wanted to see my ID, and then I think if I didn't have ID, I probably would have been searched. But I had my license on me, and I lived in the neighborhood, and it was clear. So I just got a fine, but it was a real dose of. This is where my tax dollars are going.
This is where your tax dollars are going. Right.
Pulling over teenagers on bicycles. It's crazy. Well, Dennis, thank you for speaking.
Because it's easy easy to do it. They need a certain quota of arrests, and it's a lot easier to arrest kids on bikes than actual dangerous drug dealers selling meth or something like that. Those are harder to get to. So
the taxi cab.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you for giving me more than an hour today. That was really, really generous of you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
It's a good stimulation.
Yeah.
Good conversation.
Yeah.
It was great. I think everybody in the forum is going to go bananas.